He could have helped her at any point. He had the money to end her suffering with a single signature. Instead, he stood at his window for 2 years and watched her sell her life piece by piece. And he waited. She sold the silver. He waited. She sold her mother's pearls. He waited. She sold her wedding ring. He waited. Then she sold the sapphire brooch he gave her when she was 23. The one thing she'd kept longer than her own marriage. And he was done waiting. Subscribe. Comment where you're watching from. And don't skip ahead. This one earns its ending. The rain had not stopped in 4 days. It came in sheets against the tall windows of Barrington House, relentless as grief, pooling in the cracked stone of the courtyard where the carriage had once turned in easy circles. The hedgerows had grown wild that spring, untended and unruly, pressing against the iron gate like supplicants. Inside, the house echoed with the particular silence of rooms that had once been full, not empty, not yet, but thinning. The kind of silence that announces itself. The kind you can hear if you know what to listen for. Eleanor Ashworth, Countess of Barrington, stood at the window of the morning room and watched the rain. She was 31 years old. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was pinned simply. No maid had touched it in 7 months. Her dress was grey, not the soft grey of morning silk, but the grey of something washed too many times, its seams beginning to whisper of surrender. She stood very still, her fingers resting lightly on the windowsill, and anyone watching her might have mistaken her composure for calm. It was not calm. It was architecture. She had built it stone by stone over 2 years, and she maintained it the way one maintains a wall against a rising sea, with daily effort, with invisible hands braced against the inside, with the absolute refusal to let anyone see the waterline climbing. Henry had died in the autumn of 1811. A fall from a horse, so ordinary it felt obscene. One moment he was laughing in the stable yard, his coat thrown over one arm, his hat askew, and the next he was on the ground, with his neck at an angle that the body was never meant to hold. Eleanor had been in the kitchen garden cutting herbs when they came for her. She remembered the rosemary in her hand. She remembered dropping it. She remembered the way the world narrowed to a single dark corridor, and at the end of it, her husband's boots, still muddy, still crossed at the ankle as if he were merely resting. The debts had revealed themselves slowly, the way a tide reveals wreckage. Henry had been generous. Henry had been careless. Henry had trusted the wrong steward, signed the wrong notes, poured money into a shipping venture that sank, literally, off the coast of Portugal. The estate was entailed to a distant cousin, a man named Reginald Hatch, who lived in Bath and had no interest in the house except as something to be sold. He allowed Eleanor to remain at Barrington through what he called Christian charity, and what she understood to be indifference. He paid nothing toward its upkeep, but lately his letters had changed in tone, the unmistakable scent of impatience, of a man who had been generous long enough and was beginning to calculate what the property might fetch at auction. And so Eleanor had begun, quietly, to sell. The silver first, wrapped in linen cloths and carried in a basket to the dealer in Thornfield, a man named Hapsworth, with small eyes and soft hands, who gave her perhaps a third of what they were worth. Then the paintings, the small watercolors Henry had bought her in Italy, the oil sketch of a Venetian canal, the miniature portrait of her mother set in a gilt frame. She took them to a different dealer in Aylesbury, so that no one in Thornfield would notice the pattern. Then the jewelry, her mother's pearls, the garnet earrings Henry had given her on their first anniversary, a gold bracelet set with seed pearls that had belonged to his mother, passed to Eleanor on her wedding day with a kiss on the forehead and the words, "You are my daughter now." She sold each piece with a face so composed it could have been painted on porcelain. She counted the money, folded it into the lining of her reticule, and walked home through the lanes with her chin lifted and her back straight, and the particular kind of emptiness that comes from watching your life converted into currency, piece by piece, just enough to survive another month. She kept one thing, one single thing she would not sell. A brooch, not large, not ostentatious. A cluster of sapphires set in silver filigree, delicate as frost on a window pane. It had not come from Henry. It had come from before Henry, from a time Eleanor rarely allowed herself to remember, from the hand of a man she had not spoken to in nearly 4 years. James Auster, Duke of Thornfield. He had given it to her the summer she was 23, at a garden party hosted by her aunt, on an afternoon so golden it seemed lit from within. She had been standing by the roses, she remembered that, the roses, heavy-headed and fragrant in the heat, and he had appeared beside her without announcement, which was his way. He was tall, even then, not handsome in any way that was easy to describe. His face was too angular, his jaw too severe, his eyes the color of winter rivers, grey-green and guarded. But when he looked at her, something in those eyes shifted, and she felt it the way you feel the first crack in a frozen lake, something giving way beneath the surface. He had pressed the brooch into her hand without ceremony. A birthday gift, he said. She had turned it over in her palm, stunned by its beauty, stunned by the fact that he had remembered, stunned most of all by the way his fingers trembled when they brushed hers. James Auster, who never trembled. James Auster, whose reputation for control was so absolute that men twice his age deferred to him in silence. She had married Henry 3 months later. She did not sell the brooch. She kept it in a velvet box in the drawer beside her bed, and on the worst nights, the nights when the house creaked around her like a ship taking on water, and the loneliness was so vast she could drown in it, she would open the box and look at it. She would not touch it. She would simply look, and remember the weight of a summer afternoon, and the way a man's voice could carry the shape of everything he would never say. But pride is a peculiar fortress. It protects and it imprisons, and Eleanor could no longer tell which side of the wall she stood on. James Auster had watched her for 26 months. He had watched from across the nave at Henry's funeral, standing at the back where the shadows pooled, his black coat indistinguishable from the dark oak of the pews. He had watched her face, white, composed, remote as marble, and he had felt something tear inside his chest so slowly and so completely that he was still feeling it tear now, 2 years later, every time he saw her walk through the village with that basket over her arm and that expression that dared the world to pity her. He knew about the silver. His housekeeper's sister worked for Hapsworth, and word travelled the way it always does in small places, not maliciously, but inevitably, like water finding its level. He knew about the paintings. He knew about the jewelry. He knew the name of every dealer she had visited and the approximate sum she had received, and the knowledge sat inside him like a coal that would not cool. He could have intervened at any point. He had the means, obscenely, excessively, almost grotesquely, to end her suffering with a single word. He could have paid Reginald 10 times the estate's value and handed her the deed wrapped in silk. He could have sent anonymous gifts. He could have arranged for her coal to be delivered without invoice, her roof repaired by men who would claim they were sent by the parish. He did none of these things. Not because he did not care, because he cared so much that the caring had become its own kind of paralysis, its own version of the very pride he watched consuming her. He knew Eleanor. He had known her since she was 19 years old, and had argued with his mother about the rights of tenant farmers at a dinner table that had gone so silent you could hear the candles breathing. He knew that her pride was not vanity. It was the last structural support of a self that had been shaken to its foundation. If he offered help, she would refuse it. If he pressed, she would retreat. And beneath all of that, there was something uglier. Something he would not name even in the privacy of his own mind during the small hours when sleep refused to come, and he stood at his own window looking out toward the lights of Barrington House, 3 miles across the valley. He was waiting for her to come to him. He wanted her to choose him, not out of desperation, not out of necessity, but out of the same thing he felt, this terrible, patient, immovable thing that had lived in his chest since he was 25 years old and watched her laugh in a rose garden and understood that he was ruined. He was aware that this made him a coward. He was aware that it might also make him cruel. He held both truths and did not flinch from them, because James Alcester did not flinch. It was the thing he was best at. It was the thing that was killing him. His sister Charlotte had noticed. Charlotte noticed everything. It was her particular talent and her particular curse. She was 4 years younger than James, small and sharp-featured where he was tall and severe, with their mother's dark eyes and their father's inability to leave a wound unprobed. She found him in the library on a Tuesday afternoon in late April, standing at the window with a glass of brandy he had not touched and a book open on the desk behind him that he had not read. The rain was still falling. It had been falling, she thought, since October. "You are staring again," she said from the doorway. James did not turn. "I am thinking." "You are staring toward Barrington, and you are calling it thinking, and I'm calling it what it is." He turned then, and the look he gave her would have silenced most people. Charlotte was not most people. She crossed the room and sat in the chair by the fire and folded her hands in her lap and looked up at him with an expression that combined patience and exasperation in equal measure. "She sold the garnet earrings last week," Charlotte said quietly. "Mrs. Blackwood told me. The ones Henry gave her. And the bracelet. Your mother's bracelet. The one she received at her wedding. She took them to a man in Aylesbury. She walked. 8 miles in the rain, James. 8 miles there and 8 miles back, carrying her dead husband's mother's jewelry in a cloth bag, because the coach horse went lame in February, and she cannot afford the farrier." James said nothing. His jaw tightened. The muscle beneath his left eye flickered once, a tremor so slight that only someone who had spent a lifetime reading his face would have caught it. Charlotte caught it. "How long?" she said, and it was not a question. "How long will you stand at this window and watch her dismantle her life piece by piece while you do nothing?" "It is not my pride." "Then what is it?" He looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled. The rain drove against the glass. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock struck 4, each chime falling into the silence like a stone into still water. "If I go to her," he said, and each word cost him something visible, "she will know." Charlotte stared at him. "Know what?" "Everything." The word hung between them. Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her brother had turned back to the window, and his reflection in the dark glass was the face of a man holding a door shut against a storm, every muscle engaged, every line taut with the effort of containment. "James," she said softly, "I think she already knows." He did not answer. After a moment, Charlotte rose and left the room, and the door closed behind her with a sound like a sentence ending. And James stood alone in the library, with the rain and the brandy, and the distance between himself and the woman he had loved for 8 years, without once, not once, telling her. But Charlotte did not go upstairs. She went to the writing desk in the morning room, and she sat there for a long time with a pen in her hand and a blank sheet of paper in front of her. And then she wrote a letter. Not to Eleanor, to Reginald Hatch. The following Tuesday, Eleanor made her decision. She sat at the kitchen table, not the dining room. She had closed the dining room in January to save on coal, with a candle burning low and a sheet of paper in front of her on which she had written 2 columns of figures. The left column was what she owed. The right column was what she had. The right column was very nearly empty. She had enough to last until the end of May. After that, the coal would run out, the account at the butcher would close, and the house would begin to die around her. The damp already creeping up the walls of the east wing, the roof already letting in rain, the kitchen garden already showing signs of the kind of neglect that, once established, cannot be reversed. She could write to her brother in London. Edward would send money. grudgingly, with the particular brand of fraternal condescension that made her feel 14 again. She could accept Lady Pemberton's standing offer to live as a companion, a polite word for dependent, a kinder word for captive. She could marry again. Mr. Harding, the solicitor, had made his interest plain in ways that were technically respectful, but carried the unmistakable scent of a man circling an opportunity. He had visited 3 times in the last month. The third visit, he had brought flowers. The flowers were still on the hall table, wilting, and Eleanor could not look at them without feeling the slow, tightening pressure of a trap she could see clearly and could not yet name. Eleanor folded the paper and placed it in the candle flame and watched it curl and blacken and disappear. She went upstairs. She opened the drawer beside the bed. She took out the velvet box. The brooch lay against the dark fabric like a handful of captured sky. The sapphires caught the candlelight and threw it back in fragments. Blue, white, blue again. And for a moment, Eleanor simply stood there, feeling the weight of it in her hands, which was so much greater than its actual weight, because it carried inside it the memory of an afternoon and a garden and a man's fingers trembling against hers, and the road she had not taken, the life she had not chosen, the version of herself she had folded away like a letter never sent. She closed the box. She placed it in the pocket of her coat. She went to bed. In the morning, she walked to Hapsworth's. The shop smelled of brass polish and old paper. Hapsworth was behind the counter, arranging a display of pocket watches. He looked up when the bell rang, and his face performed the complicated sequence of recognition, assessment, and professional sympathy that Eleanor had come to know well. She placed the box on the counter. She did not open it. "I would like to know what you would offer for this." Hapsworth opened the box. His eyebrows rose. He lifted the brooch carefully, turned it in the light, examined the setting with a loupe he produced from his waistcoat pocket. "This is very fine work," he said. "Georgian. The sapphires are exceptional. Ceylon, if I am not mistaken. And the silver filigree. This is not commercial craftsmanship, Lady Barrington. This was made by a master. Commissioned, I would say, for someone specific." Eleanor said nothing. Hapsworth looked at her over the top of his loupe. His small eyes were not unkind. He had watched this woman sell her life away over 18 months, and he was not, despite what his profession might suggest, entirely without feeling. "I could offer you £12, he said, "but it is worth considerably more. If you were to take it to London, you could expect 40, perhaps 50. £12 would pay the butcher and the coal merchant through June. It would buy another month." "£12, Eleanor said. "That will do." She left the shop with the money in her reticule and the velvet box empty in her pocket, and the feeling, very distinct, very precise, of having cut the last rope that tethered her to something she could not name. Not to the past, not to Henry. To a possibility she had carried for years, like a stone in her shoe, always present, always painful, never examined. She was halfway down the high street when she stopped. She stood in the street with the rain falling on her bare head. She had forgotten her bonnet, or perhaps she had sold it. And she thought, this is what it looks like. This is the shape of pride when it has eaten everything else. She did not cry. She had not cried since the rosemary. She simply stood, and the rain fell, and the street was empty because it was early and no one was watching. Except that someone was. James Alcester's carriage had been passing through the high street when his driver slowed for a cart. James had glanced out the window, a reflex, nothing more, and seen her. Standing in the rain without a bonnet, her hair darkening with water, her coat too thin, her face turned slightly upward as if she were listening to something only she could hear. And something in the way she stood, not defeated, not broken, but absolutely, terrifyingly still, made him rap on the ceiling of the carriage so hard his knuckles split. "Stop," he said. The driver stopped. James did not get out. He sat in the carriage with his hand still raised and his knuckles bleeding, and he watched her through the rain-streaked glass, and he felt every carefully constructed wall he had built over 8 years begin to crack. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way ice cracks on a river in early spring, with a sound like a held breath releasing. Then he saw where she had come from. Hapsworth's. The sign was visible over her shoulder, and he knew, with the absolute certainty of a man who has catalogued every detail of another person's unraveling, that she had sold something. He knew what she had left to sell. He knew there was almost nothing. And in the same instant, with a clarity that felt less like realization than like a blade, he knew what it was. He got out of the carriage. The rain hit him immediately. He did not notice. He walked past Eleanor. She had not seen him, still standing with her face turned up, and he pushed open the door of Hapsworth's shop, and the bell rang, and Hapsworth looked up with an expression that shifted rapidly from professional welcome to something considerably more complicated. "Your Grace," Hapsworth said. "What a pleasant—" James placed both hands on the counter. The knuckles of his right hand were still bleeding. Hapsworth stared at them. "The item Lady Barrington just sold you," James said. His voice was very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that people who knew him understood was far more dangerous than volume. "Show it to me." Hapsworth hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he reached beneath the counter and produced the velvet box and opened it. And James looked down at the brooch, the sapphires, the silver filigree, the work he had commissioned when he was 24 years old, from a jeweler in London, who had asked him 3 times if he was certain about the design, because it was, the jeweler said, a very particular piece, the kind of piece a man commissions for a woman he intends to. And James closed his eyes. He closed his eyes, and he stood in Hapsworth's shop, and he felt 8 years of patience and pride and self-imposed exile collapse inside him like a condemned building, floor by floor, each one falling into the one below, until there was nothing left standing. "How much did you give her?" he said without opening his eyes. £12, Your Grace." James opened his eyes. He looked at Hapsworth with an expression that made the dealer take one involuntary step backward. "You gave her £12, James said, "for a piece worth 60. Hapsworth opened his mouth. No sound came out. James placed £60 on the counter. He picked up the brooch. He placed it in his coat pocket. He turned and walked out of the shop without another word. Eleanor was gone. The street was empty. The rain continued to fall. James stood on the pavement with the brooch in his pocket, and the absolute, bone-deep knowledge that he was finished waiting. He was finished being patient. He was finished standing at windows and constructing elaborate justifications for his own cowardice. He was finished. He got back in the carriage. "Barrington House," he said. The driver turned the horses. The drive took nearly 40 minutes in the rain. James spent every one of those minutes in a state of such concentrated internal violence that he was distantly surprised the carriage did not simply combust from the force of it. He had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times. He had planned for every contingency. He had planned for none of it, because the truth was that no amount of rehearsal could prepare him for the simple act of standing in front of Eleanor Ashworth and saying what he had never said, what he had contained for so long that it had become the architecture of his entire life. The carriage stopped. The gate of Barrington House stood open. The latch had broken months ago. The hedgerows pressed against the iron. The house itself looked, in the rain, like something holding its breath. James got out. He walked to the door. He knocked. For a long time, nothing happened. The rain fell on his hat and his shoulders, and the stone steps beneath his feet. He knocked again. He heard footsteps, slow, measured, the footsteps of someone who was not expecting company and was not certain they wanted any. The door opened. Eleanor stood in the doorway in her grey dress, with her hair damp and her face pale, and her eyes. God, her eyes. He had forgotten nothing about her eyes, but he had forgotten how they felt when they landed on him. The physical weight of her attention, the way it made every surface of his body aware of itself. She stared at him. The colour left her face and then returned unevenly, a flush across her cheekbones that she could not control, and that told him more than any words could have. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was careful, constructed, the voice of a woman who has rehearsed composure the way other women rehearse songs. "May I come in?" he said. It was not a question in the way he said it, though the words were shaped like one. It was a statement of what was about to happen. She stepped back. He entered. The hall was cold, colder than outside almost, the kind of cold that accumulates in a house that has not been properly heated in months. He saw the closed doors of the dining room, the drawing room, the morning room. He saw the single candle burning on the hall table. He saw Mr. Harding's wilting flowers, and something in his chest tightened that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with the particular violence of imagining someone else in the space he had been too afraid to occupy. He saw the shape of 2 years of silence. Eleanor closed the door behind him. She stood with her back to it and her hands clasped in front of her, and she looked at him with an expression that he could not read, which frightened him, because he had always been able to read her. "You are wet," she said. "Yes." "You should come to the kitchen. There is a fire there." He followed her. The kitchen was the only warm room in the house. A fire burned in the grate, not large, but tended with the careful economy of someone who knows exactly how much coal remains. The table was scrubbed clean. A single cup and a single plate sat beside the basin. 1 cup, 1 plate. The arithmetic of sonitude. Eleanor gestured to a chair. He did not sit. He stood by the table and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and the silence between them was so full of unsaid things that the room seemed to vibrate with it. "I saw you," he said, "in the street, outside Hapsworth's." Something flickered in her face, a crack in the porcelain. She repaired it instantly, but he had seen it, and they both knew he had seen it. "I had business there," she said. "Yes." He reached into his coat pocket. He withdrew the brooch. He placed it on the kitchen table between them, and the sapphires caught the firelight and threw blue shadows across the scrubbed wood. And Eleanor looked down at it, and every line of composure she had built over 2 years began to tremble. She did not speak. She could not speak. She stared at the brooch, and her lips parted, and no sound came out. And James watched her face, and felt something inside him break open that was not a wall, but a door he had locked from the inside, a door he had stood behind for 8 years, pressing his hands against the wood and telling himself that this was enough, that this was what honor looked like, that this was the right thing. "You went to Hapsworth's," he said, and his voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it steady. "You sold this." He touched the brooch. "This. Of everything you have sold, the silver, the paintings, your mother's pearls, the garnets, your mother-in-law's bracelet. You sold this." Her eyes snapped to his. The color drained from her face. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew about all of it." "Yes." "How long?" she said. "From the beginning." Eleanor's hands began to shake. She pressed them flat against the table. The tremor was visible in her wrists, her forearms, the tendons of her neck. "From the beginning. You knew I was selling everything. You knew about Hapsworth and the dealer in Aylesbury. You knew I walked 8 miles in the rain. You knew all of it." "Yes. And you did nothing." James met her eyes. The fire crackled. The rain drove against the kitchen window. "I did nothing," he said. "And I will tell you why. And you will hate me for it. And you will be right." She waited. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something harder had replaced the tremor, something bright and hot behind her eyes that he recognized because he had seen it once before, years ago, at a dinner table when she was 19 and had looked at his mother with exactly that expression before telling her that tenant farmers were human beings, deserving of dignity. And if the Alcester family could not see that, then they were no better than the mud on their own boots. He had fallen in love with her in that exact moment. He had never recovered. "I did nothing," he said, "because I wanted you to come to me." He heard the words leave his mouth, and they sounded worse than he had imagined, stripped of all the careful reasoning and reduced to their bare, shameful truth. "I wanted you to need me. I wanted you to choose me. I have loved you for 8 years, Eleanor, and I have never once told you, and I have waited because I am a proud man and because I was afraid, not of your refusal, but of your pity. And I watched you suffer because my pride was greater than my courage." The kitchen was very still. Eleanor looked at him. Her face had gone through so many changes in the last 60 seconds that it had arrived somewhere entirely new, a place he had never seen, an expression composed of equal parts fury and anguish, and something else, something that looked like recognition, like the moment you see your own reflection in a window you thought was a wall. 8 years, she said. 8 years. Since the garden party. Since the garden party. Since the roses. Since you were wearing a white dress with blue ribbons, and you laughed at something your aunt said, and I thought... He stopped. His jaw worked. The muscle beneath his eye trembled. I thought, I will never recover from this. And I was right. Eleanor pressed her palms against the table so hard her knuckles went white. She leaned forward, and when she spoke, her voice was low and shaking and fierce. "I sold that brooch," she said, "because it was the last thing I had. Not the last thing of value, the last thing that mattered. I kept it longer than my mother's pearls. I kept it longer than my wedding ring, James. Do you understand what I am telling you? I sold my wedding ring in November, and I slept soundly. I sold that brooch this morning, and I could not breathe." He could not move. He stood on the other side of the kitchen table with the brooch between them, and his coat still dripping, and his knuckles still raw, and he could not move because she had said his name. Not Your Grace. Not Duke. James. She had said James, and the sound of it in her mouth after all these years was the most devastating thing he had ever heard. "I kept it," she continued, and her voice was rising now, not in volume, but in intensity, each word landing with the precision of someone who has held something inside for so long that when it finally breaks free, it comes out perfectly formed. "I kept it because it was the only proof I had that what I felt was real. That someone had once looked at me and seen, not a wife, not a widow, not a countess, not a charity case, but me. And I sold it because I would rather starve than let it become currency. I sold it because if I kept it one more day, I would have done something I cannot take back. I would have come to you." The silence after those words was the loudest thing in the room. James moved. He walked around the table. She did not step back. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the rain still caught in his hair, the raw skin of his knuckles, the vein beating in his throat. "Then you should have come," he said, "and let you rescue me, like some..." Her voice broke. "Like some creature too weak to survive on her own. Is that what you think this is?" "Is it not?" He reached out. He took her hand, her left hand, the one still pressed white-knuckled against the table, and he lifted it, slowly, carefully, the way you lift something that might shatter, and he held it between both of his, and she felt his hands shaking as badly as hers, and she understood suddenly and completely that his steadiness had always been a performance, that beneath the granite exterior, he was vibrating at the same frequency she was. That he had been vibrating at that frequency for 8 years, alone, in silence, across a distance of 3 miles and 1,000 unspoken words. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was rough and low and stripped of every defense. "I am not here to rescue you. I am here because you sold the only thing I ever gave you, and it broke something in me that I cannot repair. I am here because I have spent 8 years being patient and 2 years being a coward, and I am finished with both. I am not offering you charity. I am not offering you comfort. I am offering you the truth, which is that I love you, and I have loved you since before you married, and I loved you while you were married, and I loved you when your husband died, and I love you now, standing in your kitchen in a house that is falling apart because you are too proud to ask for help, and I am too proud to offer it. And we have both been such magnificent fools that we deserve each other." She made a sound, not a laugh, not a sob, something between the two, something that lived in the space where those two things become indistinguishable, where the relief is so enormous that the body does not know which release to choose. "You waited," she said. "You stood at your window and you watched me, and you waited." "Yes." "You could have written. You could have sent word. You could have knocked on this door at any point in the last 2 years." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid," he said, "that you would look at me the way you are looking at me now, and that I would see in your eyes what I see now, and that it would be real, and that I would have to become the kind of man who deserves it. And I did not know if I could." Her breath caught. "And now?" "And now I do not care if I deserve it. I only care that it exists. And I will spend whatever years remain to me trying to be worthy of it. But I will not spend one more day pretending it is not there." She pulled her hand from his. He felt the withdrawal like a physical blow, and his face flinched. But she had not pulled away to create distance. She had pulled away to lift both hands to his face, to cup his jaw in her palms, to hold him the way he had been holding her hand, carefully, as though he were the fragile one, as though he were the one who might break. "You ridiculous man," she whispered. "You proud, impossible, ridiculous man. I have been in love with you since I was 23 years old." The sound he made was not a word. It was older than words. It came from somewhere below language, below thought, from the place where the body stores the things the mind refuses to hold. 8 years of silence and restraint, and nights spent staring at a ceiling, and mornings spent not reaching for a pen to write to her, and the fear had kept him warm in the terrible way that fires burn the thing that feeds them. He kissed her, not gently, not tentatively. He kissed her like a man who had been drowning for 8 years and had finally been pulled to the surface, gasping, desperate, alive in a way that hurt because feeling anything after that long a numbness is a kind of violence. His hands found her waist, her back, the curve of her shoulder, as if he needed to confirm that she was real, that she was solid, that she would not disappear the way she disappeared every night when he closed his eyes. She kissed him back with equal ferocity. She kissed him the way she had done everything for the last 2 years, with complete commitment, holding nothing in reserve. Her fingers curled into the wet fabric of his coat, and she pulled him closer and closer, was not close enough, and would never be close enough, and they both understood this simultaneously, the impossibility of recovering lost time, and the absolute necessity of trying anyway. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Her forehead rested against his chin. His arms were around her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her collarbone, rapid and uneven, the heartbeat of a man whose body had not yet received the message that the siege was over. The fire crackled. The rain softened against the window. "You are still wet," she said against his chest. "Yes." "You will catch your death." "Unlikely." She almost laughed. The sound was rusty, unpracticed. The sound of a woman remembering what it felt like to be amused. Then a knock came at the front door. Eleanor went rigid in his arms. James released her, not quickly, not with the instinct of a man caught doing something wrong, but with the slow, deliberate reluctance of a man who understood that releasing her now cost him something he would calculate later. They stood apart. The knock came again. 3 raps, precise, professional. Eleanor smoothed her dress. She touched her hair. The composure reassembled itself on her face with a speed that James found both impressive and painful to watch. She went to the front door. James followed, stopping in the shadow of the hallway. She opened it. Mr. Harding stood on the step. He was a compact man of about 40, well dressed in the particular way of men who wish to communicate prosperity without appearing to try. He held a leather case under one arm, and his face, when he saw Eleanor, arranged itself into an expression of warm, professional concern that did not reach the calculation behind his eyes. "Lady Barrington," he said, "forgive the intrusion. I would not have called without notice, but the matter is somewhat urgent. It concerns the estate." Something shifted in Eleanor's posture. The particular alertness of a woman who has learned that the word estate in the mouth of a solicitor rarely brings good news. She stepped back and let him in. Harding entered the hall and stopped when he saw James standing in the corridor. The 2 men looked at each other. Harding's expression performed a rapid and visible recalculation. Surprise, assessment, something that flickered briefly toward hostility before being smoothed over with professional courtesy. "Your Grace," Harding said, "I did not expect to find you here." James said nothing. He simply looked at Harding with the particular stillness he employed when he wished a man to understand that his presence had been noted and his intentions were being evaluated, and that neither process was likely to conclude in the man's favor. They went to the kitchen. Harding looked at the single cup and the single plate and the low fire and said nothing about any of it, which Eleanor found more humiliating than if he had commented. Harding placed the letter on the table. Eleanor read it twice. Reginald Hatch had sold Barrington House, not to Eleanor, not with her knowledge or consultation. He had sold it to a developer from London named Mr. Arthur Graves, who intended to demolish the house and sell the land in parcels. The sale was to be finalized within 6 weeks. Eleanor was to vacate within 30 days. The kitchen was very quiet. Eleanor set the letter down. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Everything about her was steady. And James, watching from the doorway, understood that this steadiness was the most dangerous kind. The steadiness of a person who has absorbed one blow too many and has gone past the point where the body knows how to react. "There are options," Harding said. His voice had shifted. Softer now. More personal. Less solicitor and more man. And the transition was so practiced that Eleanor could see the machinery of it moving. "You need not face this alone. If you were to allow me to represent your interests, without fee, as a personal courtesy, I believe I could negotiate an extension." He leaned forward. The gesture was calibrated, intimate without being improper. The flowers on the hall table, the 3 visits, the letters, all of it leading to this convergence of crisis and availability, this carefully tended opportunity. "You have been managing alone for too long," he said quietly. "I would like to help, in whatever capacity you will allow." Eleanor saw the offer for what it was. Not charity, not even affection. Leverage. The slow, patient accumulation of dependency that begins with flowers and ends with obligation. She opened her mouth to respond. James spoke first. "Mr. Harding." His voice came from the doorway, quiet, precise, absent of any emotion that might dilute its effectiveness. "When did you become aware of the sale?" Harding turned. "I received the letter this morning. The letter is dated 4 days ago. A pause. Post can be unreliable. The letter was sent from Bath. Post from Bath arrives in Thornfield within 2 days. You have had this information for at least 48 hours. Another pause. Longer. You wanted to wait, James said. You wanted Lady Barrington to have 2 fewer days to respond. You wanted her to receive this news in a state of maximum urgency, with minimum time to seek alternatives, at a moment when your offer of assistance would appear most necessary. The kitchen was absolutely still. That is an extraordinary accusation, Harding said. His voice was controlled, but the control was costing him now. It is an observation, James said. I find them more useful than accusations. Mr. Harding, Eleanor said. Her voice was calm. Not the calm of architecture, decisive. Thank you for delivering the letter. I will not require your representation. Lady Barrington, I urge you to reconsider. The timeline. I am aware of the timeline. I am also aware of your interest, and I am declining it. All of it. The word all landed like a door closing. Harding heard it. His face tightened, and for one unguarded moment, the calculation showed through the courtesy like bone through skin. He looked at James. He looked at the brooch still lying on the kitchen table. He drew a conclusion that was, for once, entirely accurate. I see, he said. He gathered his papers. He walked to the door, and Eleanor showed him out, and the front door closed with the particular finality of something ended rather than merely interrupted. Eleanor returned to the kitchen. She stood in the doorway and looked at James. 30 days, she said. James picked up the letter. He read it carefully, the way he read everything, with the attention of a man who understood that the difference between ruin and remedy could live in a single clause. Arthur Graves, he said. I know the name. London developer. Buys estates from men like Reginald and parcels them. He operates on leverage and speed. He moved to the window. 6 weeks to finalize. The contract is not yet signed. Eleanor watched him. She watched the way his mind engaged with the problem, completely, precisely, with the particular intensity she had once mistaken for coldness and now understood was the opposite. It was what happened when James Auster cared. The temperature dropped, the focus narrowed, everything extraneous fell away. What are you thinking? She said. I am thinking that Reginald Hatch has made a mistake. The entail gives him the right to sell. It does not give him the right to sell without notifying all interested parties. If there is a competing offer at equal or greater value before the contract is signed, the terms of the entail require it to be considered. Eleanor looked at him. She understood what he was about to say, and she understood how it would sound, and she watched him choose his words with the precision of a man diffusing something that could detonate in either direction. If I make an offer for Barrington, he said, at a price Graves cannot match, Reginald is legally obligated to consider it. But Eleanor, it would mean my name on the deed, my money in the transaction, my involvement, publicly and legally. There would be no way to disguise it. You are asking me to let you buy my home. I am asking you to let me prevent someone else from destroying it. There is a difference. Is there? Yes, because when this is done, the deed will be in your name, not mine, yours. That is the condition. That is the only way I will do this. Something moved across her face. Not gratitude. She was far past gratitude. It was the look of a woman who had just been seen, completely, structurally, down to the foundation, by someone who understood exactly what she needed and exactly how to offer it without making her smaller. Why in my name? Because it is your home. You kept it alive with your bare hands for 2 years. You sold everything you had to keep these walls standing. That is not something I am going to take from you. That is something I am going to make permanent. She crossed the kitchen. She walked directly to him and stood close enough that he could see the pulse beating in her throat and the firelight in her eyes. Then do it, she said. Buy the house. Fight Reginald. Outbid Graves. Put my name on the deed. And then, James Alster, you are going to sit in my kitchen and explain to me in precise detail how you intend to court a woman who has just been publicly saved by a duke, because I will not have this county believing I was bought. I will have them know I was chosen, and I will have them know I chose back. The ghost of something crossed his face, the structural foundation of a smile. That may take some time to explain. Then you had better stay for tea. He stayed. He stayed for tea, and then he stayed for the afternoon. And the rain fell, and the fire burned low, and they sat at the kitchen table and talked. Not about love, not about the 8 years, not about the kiss that still hummed between them like a struck bell, but about law, about entails and competing offers and the specific language of property transfer. They talked the way two intelligent, stubborn, furiously competent people talk when they have finally stopped fighting each other and started fighting the same enemy. With precision, with energy, with the particular electricity that comes from discovering that the person you love is also the person you want beside you in a war. Eleanor knew more about the entail than James had expected. She had spent months reading Henry's papers, educating herself in the dry and merciless language of property law. James knew more about Arthur Graves than anyone in the county. Graves had attempted to purchase land adjacent to Thornfield 2 years earlier, and James had blocked the sale through a legal maneuver so devastating that Graves had not spoken to him since. By evening, they had a strategy. By nightfall, James had written 3 letters, to his solicitor, to Reginald, and to Graves. And Eleanor had written one, to her brother Edward, which read in its entirety, "I am handling this. Do not interfere." She signed it with her full name and sealed it with candle wax, because she had long since sold the proper sealing set. James left at 9. He stood in the doorway with his coat still damp and the brooch still in his pocket and the 3 letters in his hand, and he looked at her in the candlelight. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she said. He walked to the carriage. She stood in the doorway and watched him go, and the rain fell on both of them. And for the first time in 2 years, Eleanor stood in the rain and did not feel it as punishment. Weather. Just weather. The kind that stops. Charlotte was waiting when he returned. She was in the library, not reading, simply sitting by the fire with an expression James recognized as the one Charlotte wore when she had done something she considered righteous and was preparing to defend it. "You wrote to Reginald," James said from the doorway. Charlotte looked at him. "Yes." "You told them there would be a buyer." "I told him there might be interest from a local party. I simply suggested that before he finalized any arrangement, he might wish to explore all options." James stood very still. "Charlotte, you accelerated this. You forced Reginald's hand. He was already considering a sale, and your letter confirmed that the property had value. You made this happen faster." Charlotte rose from her chair. She was a foot shorter than her brother, and she looked up at him without flinching. "Yes," she said, "I did. Because you were standing at that window for 2 years, and she was selling her life in pieces, and neither of you was going to break. Someone had to create a crisis large enough that you could not stand at your window anymore. I chose to be that someone, and I will not apologize for it." The fire crackled. James looked at his sister for a long time. The anger was there, but it had been joined by something that looked, improbably, like gratitude. "The letters are already sent," he said. "I am making a competing offer. The deed will go in Eleanor's name." Charlotte's eyes went bright. She nodded once. "It's about time," she said. She also said, James added quietly, "that I am a ridiculous man." "She is right," Charlotte said. "But you are our ridiculous man. Both of ours now." She left, but she stopped at the door and turned back. "James," The offer cannot come from you. Not directly.
Not if you want Eleanor Standing to survive this.
He looked at her. If a duke buys a widow's house, Charlotte said, it is a rescue. If a widow buys her own house with a documented private loan, it is a legal transaction. Eleanor must present the offer herself. Your funds, her name, her agency. Otherwise, Graves will use your involvement to argue that the competing bid is not independent, and the county will call her your charity case for the rest of her life. James said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You have been thinking about this." "Since I wrote the letter to Reginald. Someone had to plan the second move." The competing offer was submitted by Eleanor Ashworth, Countess of Barrington, through a solicitor in Aylesbury named Mr. Thorne, a thin, quiet man who spoke very little and won cases with the particular tenacity of a person who has been underestimated his entire career. The funds were documented as a private loan from the Duke of Thornfield, with terms and repayment and interest all specified and witnessed. Eleanor signed every document herself. James signed only the loan agreement. Graves responded within the week. His solicitor filed a challenge, claiming the competing offer had been submitted improperly and that Eleanor lacked standing to make the offer in her own right. The challenge was, in Thorne's quiet assessment, not without merit. It would require a response. It would require time. And time was the one thing Eleanor did not have. 30 days. The legal challenge could take months. Eleanor received this news at the kitchen table, with Thorne's letter spread before her, and James at the window, and Charlotte in the chair by the fire. "He is trying to outlast me," Eleanor said. "He knows the challenge will take longer than 30 days, she continued. "He knows I will be forced to leave before it is resolved. And once I have left, his position strengthens, because I am no longer demonstrating the continuous occupation that supports my claim." "There is another option," Eleanor said. "I do not leave. The 30-day notice requires me to vacate if the sale is finalized. The sale is not finalized. It is being challenged. While the challenge is active, the original terms of my occupancy remain in effect. Reginald permitted me to remain. He has not formally revoked that permission. Until the sale is complete, I have every legal right to stay." Thorne confirmed this with the particular satisfaction of a man who appreciated precision in others. Eleanor stayed. Graves sent men, not the violent kind, the worse kind. Surveyors and assessors and inspectors with clipboards and measuring tapes, who walked through the house, cataloguing its deficiencies, with an efficiency designed to communicate that the property was already theirs. They measured rooms she was sitting in. They tested walls she was leaning against. They wrote notes about the condition of the roof while standing in her kitchen. Eleanor offered them tea. She asked their names. She stood in every doorway they attempted to pass through and asked, pleasantly and precisely, whether they had documentation authorizing their inspection, because she was quite certain the law required it. They did not have documentation. They left. They came back the next day with documentation. Eleanor read it at the door, identified a procedural error in the authorization, the property address was listed incorrectly, and declined to permit entry until a corrected version was produced. They came back a third day. They found Charlotte in the front hall, sitting at a desk she had placed directly inside the entrance, with a ledger open before her and a pen in her hand, and an expression of polite professional interest that stopped them like a wall. "Good morning," Charlotte said. "I have reviewed your corrected authorization forms and identified 2 additional errors, which I have noted in the margin. When these are resolved, you are welcome to return." Tea? They did not stay for tea. James came to Barrington every day. He maintained the precise public distance of a man who understood that the legal case depended in part on Eleanor's independent standing, and that any appearance of cohabitation would provide Graves with exactly the ammunition he needed. But within that distance, something was growing, something quiet and daily and cumulative. The way 2 people learn each other, not through grand gestures, but through small ones. The way he brought her coffee, because she had mentioned once she preferred it to tea.
The way she left books on the hall table she thought he would find interesting. The way they argued about the legal strategy with an energy that was not conflict, but collaboration. She learned that his hands, which could be so still in public, were restless in private, always reaching for something, adjusting something, finding reasons to be near her hands without quite touching them. He learned that her courage was even more extraordinary up close. Not because it was fearless, but because it was not. She was afraid every day. Afraid of losing the house. Afraid of what the county was saying. Afraid of the enormous vulnerability of letting someone see her clearly after 2 years of concealment. She was afraid, and she did everything anyway. He told her this once, in the kitchen garden, late on an afternoon in June, when the light was long and the lavender she had planted was beginning to bloom. "You are the bravest person I have ever known," he said. She was on her knees in the dirt, with her sleeves rolled up and soil beneath her fingernails. "That is not true," she said. "It is." She sat back on her heels. She looked at him with the expression that appeared when she was deciding whether to let him see something she usually kept hidden. "I almost wrote to Harding," she said quietly. "Last month. Before all of this. Before you came. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in my hand and I almost said yes. Not because I wanted to. Because I was tired. Because I had been brave for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like. And he was offering a door, and I was so tired of walls." James did not speak. He knelt beside her in the dirt, and he listened with the full body attention he gave to everything she said. "I did not write the letter," she said. "I burned it. But I want you to know that I almost did. I want you to know that your version of me, the brave one, the defiant one, the one who stands in doorways, that version is real, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth includes a woman who almost gave up. And I need you to know that. Because if this is going to be real, you have to know the whole person." He looked at her. The light was golden. The lavender swayed. He reached out and took her hand, the dirt-streaked, capable, trembling hand, and he held it. "I know," he said. "I have always known. The whole person is the one I love. Not the version. The whole." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, and he held her in the garden with the evening light falling around them. And it was not a grand moment. It was a small one, a real one. The kind that matters more than any declaration, because it is built on the ground of complete honesty, rather than the architecture of performance. The legal ruling came in July. Thorne won. The ruling came in a letter, dry and procedural, and devastating in its precision. The competing offer had been properly submitted. The entail's provisions applied. Graves, a man who operated on speed and leverage, chose not to appeal. When both were removed, he retreated to find easier prey. Reginald, faced with the growing suspicion that continuing to resist would cost him more in legal fees than the property was worth, accepted Eleanor's bid. The deed was transferred on a Thursday in late July. Eleanor signed it at Thorne's office, with Charlotte and James as witnesses. She read the deed twice. She looked at her name on the paper. Her name, only her name. And something happened to her face that James would remember for the rest of his life. Not the composure cracking. Something gentler. Something that looked like a woman finally setting down a weight she had been carrying for so long that she had forgotten what her shoulders felt like without it. They drove back to Barrington in James's carriage. Charlotte rode with the driver, which she claimed was because she preferred the air, and which everyone understood was because she possessed the particular intelligence of a woman who knows when to make herself absent. In the carriage, Eleanor sat beside James and looked out the window at the lanes she had walked for 2 years, carrying baskets of silver and parcels of paintings. And she was quiet for a long time, and he was quiet beside her, and the silence was the best kind, the kind that does not need to be filled. "James," she said. "Yes. Ask me now."
He looked at her. She looked at him. The carriage rocked gently on the road. "Eleanor," he said, "will you marry me?" She did not say yes. She said something better. She said, "I was going to ask you the same thing." He laughed. The sound surprised them both. James Ulster did not laugh. Not in public, not in private, not in any space that anyone had ever witnessed. But he laughed now. A real laugh. Full and sudden and warm, and it filled the carriage the way sunlight fills a room when the curtains are opened. And Eleanor heard it, and felt something inside her chest expand to accommodate it. A new room she had not known existed, built for this specific sound. She took his face in her hands. She kissed him, gently this time, not with the desperate ferocity of the kitchen, but with the slow, deliberate tenderness of a woman who has all the time in the world, because she has finally stopped losing it. The carriage reached Barrington. The gate was repaired. James had arranged it weeks ago, the first thing, before anything else, because the gate was what she saw every time she came home, and he wanted her to see something that worked. They passed through it and into the courtyard, and the house stood before them, still imperfect, still scarred, but the door was open. Charlotte was already inside, and a lamp was burning in the kitchen, and it was, despite everything, home. "I am going to fix the roof properly," he said, "and the east wing. And I am going to buy back every painting and every piece of silver and your mother's pearls and the garnet earrings and the bracelet my mother gave you. Not as charity, as a wedding gift." "And the brooch?" she said. He reached into his coat pocket. The sapphires caught the last of the summer light and threw blue shadows across his palm. "This was always yours," he said. "I just needed to give it to you properly." He placed it in her hand. Her fingers closed around it. She held it against her chest, and the metal was warm from his body, and she felt the edges of the silver filigree press into her skin like a signature. The wedding was in September, small, private, the village church. Charlotte stood as witness. Mrs. Blackwood cried. Hapsworth, who had been invited because Eleanor possessed a sense of humor that revealed itself in precisely these kinds of choices, sat in the back pew and looked deeply uncomfortable and deeply moved in equal measure. Eleanor wore the brooch. 3 years later, on a morning in late spring, Eleanor sat in the kitchen garden at Barrington House and watched her daughter take her first steps across the grass. The child had her father's grey-green eyes and her mother's honey-coloured hair, and a determination in her small face that both parents recognized with a mixture of pride and terror. James sat beside her on a bench he had built himself, badly, with the help of a patient carpenter who had learned not to comment on the Duke's technique. The granite was gone from his face. Not entirely. It returned in public, in the House of Lords, in any room where his authority was required. But here, in the garden, with his daughter stumbling toward a lavender bush with her arms outstretched, the granite was nowhere to be found. "She is heading for the chamomile," Eleanor said. "She has your stubbornness." James looked at her. The smile, the real one, the one that had taken 8 years and 12 pounds and one desperate morning in the rain to unlock, spread across his face. "She has your courage," he said. "That will serve her better than anything I could give her." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. His arm came around her. She felt the warmth of him and the steady rhythm of his heart and the quality of his silence, which had changed from containment to contentment. The child reached the lavender and grabbed a fistful and laughed. The sound rose into the May air, and Eleanor closed her eyes and felt the sun on her face and thought, This is what it cost. The silver and the paintings and the pearls and the ring and the brooch and 2 years of cold soup and dignity held together with wire and will. And I would pay it again. Every dress, every mile in the rain, every doorway I stood in refusing to move. I would pay it 1,000 times, Because this garden, this child, this man's arm around my shoulder, this is what remains when pride breaks, and something stronger takes its place. And in the pocket of James Alcester's coat, because he carried it always, an empty velvet box, the satin lining faintly indented with the shape of a brooch that had travelled from a jeweller's workshop to a rose garden, to a velvet-lined drawer, to a pawnbroker's counter, to a man's bleeding hand, to a kitchen table, to a woman's wedding dress. The whole history of two people who had loved each other in silence and almost lost each other to the weight of everything they would not say. Almost, but not quite. Because in the end, £12 and a handful of sapphires had done what 8 years of patience could not. They had broken the silence. And what rushed in to fill it was not noise, not spectacle, but something quieter and more durable. The steady, ordinary, magnificent sound of two people who had finally stopped being afraid, living their one shared life in the full and certain knowledge that every cost had been worth paying, every weight had been worth enduring, and every word left unspoken had been, at last, and forever, said.